So, I wanted to begin my comments tonight. I decided I wanted to quote something that was written back in 1892. It was written by a very radical socialist back in 1892, and he hoped that by reciting these words, people all over the country would start reciting these phrases, and they'd start saying them, and that this could be the basis for a mass movement in the United States that would totally reorient the economic system to work in the interest of the people of the country, and would also get rid of racism. So, are you ready for these very radical words that were written back in 1892 by a very, very radical socialist?
Yeah.
Well, I think they're quite familiar to folks here in the room. They go like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I bet you didn't know that Francis Bellamy, the author of the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, was a socialist. He was actually a socialist. He was a Baptist minister. He was a Baptist minister in Boston, and his sermons were so radical that he was banned from the pulpit. He wasn't allowed to preach in the city of Boston, so he moved to Florida. And he had a bit of a problem because he refused to preach to segregated congregations. He didn't believe in racism and segregation, so he couldn't preach in Florida either, so it's an interesting history. But Francis Bellamy, the author of the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, he wasn't the only radical socialist in U.S. history. Abraham Lincoln, in the Union Army, he had a general, August Willock, a brigadier general in the Army, who was leading soldiers into battle. And throughout the entire war, he was corresponding directly with Karl Marx and getting advice and instruction from Karl Marx about how to wage the Civil War. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt openly met at the White House with the League Against War and Fascism and the founders of the Congress for Industrial Organizations. He worked with the unemployment councils. And they've done polls in the USA, and the two most beloved presidents that we've ever had are Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I think it's not a coincidence that those are the two presidents that had the most friendly and the most open relationship with people who think like us, with leftists and socialists. So that's something to keep in mind. There's nothing un-American about socialism. There's no reason that you can't be in this country and believe in socialism. They've done so much to convince us that our whole identity as Americans is based on the free market. And that's false. We have a whole other history. And when we have socialism in the United States, we are not going to have Korean socialism, Russian socialism, Cuban socialism, Venezuelan socialism, Norwegian or Swedish socialism. The only type of socialism that we're ever going to have here in the United States is going to be American socialism. It's going to be a socialism rooted in the progressive and democratic struggles that have taken place on this very soil. A lot of ugly, awful things have happened in the history of the United States of America. Jim Crow segregation, racism, but there's a whole other side to the American people. While every single one of these injustices was taking place, there were people who were actively struggling against them. And that spirit, that democratic history of struggle that you can find in American history, that's going to be the basis for building a new country in the United States.